was forced to remain naked in a cell, and then I was tortured brutally. And then I was hit with a butt of a gun on my head, beating me every day. Then would come another group saying that they were from the security police, beating me, and then I was naked, pulling me with my private parts, hitting me on the head, and even I've got a spine problem where I am.
During the last few decades before 1994, activists who fought against apartheid regularly told the courts that they were tortured by the police. The magistrates and the judges rarely took these allegations seriously, and the police and the government consistently denied that any form of torture was used in jails or police cells. The activists were called liars who wanted to escape justice. And then came the evidence before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Many activists who were tortured by the police told the heartbreaking stories of how they were abused. And for the first time, some of the torturers came forward and not only admitted that they tortured people, but described exactly how they did it. Torture was one of 4 categories classified as gross human rights violations by the Truth Commission. The others were killing, abduction, and severe ill treatment. The Truth Commission's final report gives this definition of torture. Torture happens in captivity or in custody of any kind, formal or informal. For example, prisons, police cells, detention camps, private houses, containers, or anywhere while the individual is tied up or bound to something. Torture is usually used to get information or to force the person to do something, for example, admit to a crime or sign a statement. But it is also used for punishment, degradation, and systematic breakdown of an individual. It includes mental or psychological torture. For example, witnessing torture or telling the person that their family is dead. Jeffrey Benzin was a Cape-based security policeman who was well known during the 1980s as someone who did not hesitate to torture detainees. During his application for amnesty, Benzin actually demonstrated one of his favorite methods of torture, the so-called wet bag method, used to half suffocate the victim, letting him breathe at the last moment, then suffocating him again. One of his victims was senior ANC leader Tony Yengeni.
What kind of man that uses a method like this one of the wet bag to people, to other human beings, repeatedly, and listening to those moans and cries and groans, and taking each of those people very near to their deaths? What kind of man are you? What kind of man is that?
Cape Town activist Ashley Forbes was another former victim.
Do you remember saying to me that that you are able to treat me like an animal or like a human being, and that how you treated me depended on whether I cooperated or not?
I can't remember it correctly, sir, but I would concede I may have said it.
After 3 months in your hands, and just prior to the 16th, I had tried to commit suicide. Could you perhaps, from your perspective, try and explain or try to help the Commission to understand why I would have come to that point to have tried to commit suicide?
What actually led to that, I cannot say, except that I concede the method of detention was a draconian law instituted by the then nationalist government, sir.
Suffocating the victim was a very effective form of torture, but the wet bag method wasn't the only one. A car tire's inner tube was also a favorite.
Okay, it's very simple. You put him down on his stomach, you handcuff him, you put your knees on his back, you stabilize, and you just take the tube and you pull it over his face. In other words, you suffocate the person. So when you tube any person, normally you wait until you see he wet his pants, then you know he's going through the gates upstairs. Then you leave him. And the minute then you tube him again.
Another popular method of torture used by the police was to administer electric shocks through electrodes attached to different parts of the victim's body.
If I said to Mr. Jacobs, I put the electrodes in his nose, I may be wrong. If I said I attached it to his genitals, I may be wrong. If I put a probe into his rectum, I may be wrong. That is why the specific methods, I could have used any one of those three.
Can I possibly...
Did you, during your service, use all three methods?
In the case of Mr. Jacobs, yes, sir.
I was your first, the first survivor of this torture method of you. You would concede that, you say?
Yes.
Yeah, you concede as well. There were other people busy with that, which means it was an official method that was authorized and approved that you were using.
Not writtenly authorized, but condoned.
You personally arrested me, Mr. Representative. Yourself and Piet Goosen. Do you remember?
It's difficult to remember, sir.
You put me in a combi yourself, Goosen and Liebenberg, and drove me to Pulenberg.
I'm not sure, but I'm willing to concede your memory will be better than mine on that aspect.
It's not true that you and Goosen assaulted me throughout the trip?
As I say, I cannot remember the arrest, but if you say we assaulted you in the combi, then I would concede that in all probability I did. I don't know how though.
Sometimes several different torture methods were used at the same time.
We used a gas mask, assaulted him and executed electrical shocks on him to gain information. He was a great ANC activist. It's a long time ago, but if I remember correctly, we used a gas mask, we put it over his head, and we left the plug in, and we denied him oxygen. His hands and feet were tied, and we assaulted him several times. We assaulted him with our bare hands, and some of the constables involved, we kicked him too. Some of the constables involved assaulted him with the handcuffs.
Sometimes severe torture broke even the bravest of men. ANC veteran Singokwana Malgas served a long prison sentence in the 1960s and was detained and tortured several times after his release.
You have told us today that you were tortured many times in many different places. If you are able to, and it's not too painful, could you describe some of that torture? What actually did they do to you?
There is what they called the helicopter method of torturing.
Of some kind.
They suffocated me by pulling a mask over my face. With the helicopter method, they put a stick behind your knees and you were hung upside down. Whilst this was happening, you were suffocated.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. That's all.
Psychological torture can have similar effects on the victim as physical torture. One form of psychological torture is solitary confinement for long periods. Zara Nakadin was a soldier from Mkhonto Sizwe in KwaZulu-Natal and spent 7 months of her prison sentence alone in her basement cell.
Like the silence in the cell, I can hear it. It's loud, I can hear the silence. And then my body, like my spirit and my body used to get so depressed that I would cry, not because I want to cry. I asked myself, I don't want to cry. But my body would just go into spasms. I'd throw myself on the bed, like that same child, and I'd riot and riot. I'd be crying and screaming against this loneliness. And I asked, but why? Why can't I endure it? I will be out in the next, I had a year to go. I can endure a year of this, just one day at a time. But every day I couldn't. Some days it used to be so bad. If my parents don't know this, I used to fill the pot with boiling hot water and I used to throw myself in because the pain of getting burnt was easy to handle. It distracted me from the psychological pain. Or I'd fill the sink with hot water and I would plunge my hands in. And because at certain times of the day, the loneliness was more painful. The sound of nobody but myself. And then that physical distraction used to help. I had a yard like this, and I'd sit on the stoop and there would be a bird there. And because I'm there, the bird flies away. And I'd cry immediately.
Rejection.
How could even the bird abandon me? And I couldn't rationalize it. I was so damaged that even the bird leaving me was painful. I was damaged. I was completely finished. But every morning when the lieutenant came and said, Mora, klagtes? And no, I would refuse to tell her that you have succeeded. You have damaged me beyond repair.
I think it was the 7th day. I was very hungry. I had no food, They left me in that small room here at Rabasut. So I would just crawl into the toilet and drink from the toilet sink.
It wasn't only the white governments before 1994 who were guilty of torture. It also happened to ANC dissidents or people suspected of disloyalty while the ANC was in exile in neighboring states.
What traumatized me most is to see people being tortured, you see, wholesomely. Lots of people, others beaten and their jaws broken. And some, there's another colleague of mine who was one of the mutineers. He had his skull opened up, you see, with a bayonet during torture. They used to beat me in the cell because they used to come in and they say, yeah, this is your last days, you bloody monkey. They beat me with guns and everything. Because I was already, designated to be executed.
Despite all the evidence, the political leaders and the generals of the National Party government steadfastly denied that they ever ordered or sanctioned torture.
I never knew that they were torturing these people, and I never approved it.
I further do not believe that the political defense of I did not know is available to me, because in many respects, I believe I did not want to know. In my own way, I had my suspicions of things that had caused discomfort in official circles. But because I did not have the facts to substantiate my suspicions, or I had lacked the courage to shout from the rooftops, I have to confess that I only whispered in the corridors. Everybody in this country knew people were tortured. They were tortured. You read it in the alternative press. Anybody who had access to the townships, my sources of information was the chairman of this commission sitting next to him, Wynand Malan, Alex Borain. We did battle on many occasions in Parliament in the face of attacks by Helen Suzman, Borain, and others simply saying the security forces were a law unto themselves. And we argued, vehemently opposed that, said you are misreading the situation, it's not true. And yet it all happened right there under our noses.
I have no evidence to indicate to me that on any occasion the Cabinet, who was the body that approved the State Security Council decisions, ever approved any unlawful act.
As a result of the ever-increasing revolutionary climate in the Republic during the 80s, and especially after the so-called 1979 Simonstadsberaad, at which the security forces were told to take the gloves off in the fight against the revolutionary enemy, the security forces came under increasing pressure to perform. The South African police and its security branch in particular were under special pressure. In this context, results became far more important than legality. The 11th commandment was well known, especially to those in the covert or the special force elements of the security forces. This was, "Thou shalt not be found out."
What I think we find difficult to understand is how this could take place. How people could die, could be tortured, could be abducted, could be buried, and many of them, and people like yourself and others just didn't know, weren't aware of, that these people were acting unlawfully or illegally or misunderstood or... Help us. I mean, how is it possible for that to take place?
No. I did not, sir, give any policeman any illegal instruction, unlawful instruction, kill a person, assault a person, or do anything of that nature. As a matter of fact, the Vice Chairman has spoken about people in incarceration. We had extensive instructions published in force orders about how these people should be dealt with, sir. Not anything illegal contained in that, sir. How they should be treated. If a policeman stepped outside that, he must explain that, sir. He must explain his actions.
It places the politicians, would you agree, in the lucky, enviable situation that they can formulate an approach to a problem but not bear the immediate consequences of that policy in the way in which it's carried out.
There's been a lot of evil. I mean, there's been a lot of evil in this country. It's being exorcised